If you have an H, it's the guy from The Daily Show. If it's just Jon, you have the superhero.
I don't think, Tom, I thought Jon Stewart was John.
Wait, this whole time I've been spelling his name wrong?
Uh-huh. You got it flipped.
In that case, an apology to Mr. Stewart and another apology to Mr. Stewart. This whole time I've been spelling his name wrong. That's why he never responded to my fan letters.
Hello, welcome to Bite Me Fanboy, a comics podcast. I'm Kate.
I'm Tom.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Kirsten.
And today is a special episode where we will be talking about the Comics Code. So I'm going to throw it over to Jordan for a quick history lesson.
Okay, so it was a combination of a couple different moral panics. So there was the rise of teenagers. There was women who had been working out of the home because we had been at war and they were trying to force women out of the workforce. And with all of that, people were trying to figure out what was really going on. People wanted to force everyone back into their ideal sort of family. And the panic that they focused on in order to rope in the comics industry was juvenile delinquency. It was Frederick Wortham is one of the main people who started this specific panic in regards to the comics industry. So he was a psychiatrist, and his 1954 book, Seduction of the Innocent, is what he used in order to say, hey, maybe comics are the issue. This is a very similar argument to what happened to video games in, I want to say it was the 90s. I just remember it growing up, so it might have been the 2000s.
There was video games in the 90s. There was Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s. Like, rather than look at larger issues involving, like, income or standard of living or infrastructure or, you know, providing places for teenagers to hang out, there's this, like, what popular media is more popular with teenagers than older folks. And so then they can swing it as this new piece of, like, popular media is doing it, rather than there's no public parks for the kids to go to, so the kids got to go hang out outside of a gas station.
You know, this does sound like the epitome of, like, MCR's teenagers do be scaring the shit out of me.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's literally it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You mean written by Gerard Way, who is also a comics book writer now?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no joke. Yeah, it's how does the song go?
Teenagers scare the living out of me.
Shit out of me.
I'm trying to remember what was it. They're gonna clean up your looks with the lies in the books to make a citizen out of you because they sleep with a gun and keep an eye on you, son, so they can watch all the things that you do.
Yes, they do.
You know, like, we gotta watch what these kids are doing. We're afraid of them. They're sleeping with a gun because they're afraid of the teenagers. It is fascinating when, say, there's a popular franchise that's involves Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s going on right now, which had its own moral panic. And then we're going to go talk about comic books. And we're just like, yeah, so anyways, it was kind of like the 80s with Dungeons and Dragons. It's just, yeah, it's a cycle that you'll see time and again. What was it? Jordan, you said it to me, which was people will want governmental regulation before they have to actually parent their kids.
Yeah.
Damn.
And one thing I thought was interesting when I was doing a little bit more research on this was that Oklahoma and Texas were already banning comics.
That doesn't surprise me.
So Frederick Wortham went to the Senate and testified in a Senate subcommittee on juvenile delinquency. And that's where, like, you can look up the court transcripts where he is talking to, I believe it's the head of EC Comics at the time, and showing comics that are meant for adults and yet implying to the Senate that these are what your young children are looking at. And I'm going, they're only looking at that if you aren't actually parenting them. It's the same thing.
Do you remember which ones he showed?
I don't remember the specific comic, but like I remember the inflammatory part was where he was showing like a severed head and an axe.
Yeah, no, that's a very famous cover. It's
Mm-hmm.
called Crime Suspense Stories, and it was Crime and Suspense Stories number 22 from 1950, and it's really famous because it's been homaged to hell and back because of how many people who created comics were influenced by like the fallout of this. And so there are so many comics like covers that will reference visually that cover. There's one where I think it's the Shadow, where he's being grabbed in the same way the head is being held, and there's like a body of a guy knocked out in front of him, laid out like the body and all that. There's a Wolverine comic where he's grabbing onto, I think, Sabretooth, the same way with his claws out. There's also like a spoof from, I want to say it's Archie Comics did one with what's her name, Die Kitty Die. But there's like, I'm going to post a couple of these. But yeah, that was one of the famous ones. There's another one that is really influential called Foul Play, and that Foul Play in the Senate hearings, it is the story of a guy who is involved, I believe, in gambling, is involved in fixing games, and when the team loses out and gets ruined because of his gambling, they kill him. And
The baseball bat one, yeah.
oh yes, yeah, the baseball bat one, yeah, the picture. If you've got that one, yeah, it was Foul Play, and that one was pretty infamous. And the amount of fallout that author had for writing a comic for adults, marketed to adults, sold to adults, the amount of fallout that guy got, he just will never talk about his comics career for the rest of his life for a reason. And here's the thing: superhero comics were not the biggest thing for comics in America. They were on the outs. It was science fiction. It was crime stories. It was all sorts of stuff like that. And because of the Comics Code hearings and the Comics Code Authority, it destroyed a lot of these entire genres. Bill Gaines was the guy from EC Comics, by the way.
Well, and also
Can we back up a little bit? Just when did this whole thing start? Like what decade?
the 50s. So it was in the
50s. Okay, go ahead.
1950s. And then also, so comic book readership was more evenly divided between men and women. So it was about the same numbers reading before the Comics Code came out. But with what we were talking about with Bill Gaines from EC Comics testifying in front of the Senate subcommittee, so you had Frederick Wortham showing him the horror comic cover and going, "Is this in good taste?" And the answer was yes for a horror comic. Again, sold to adults. It's not showing like blood dripping from the head. It's not, it is graphic, but it's not unduly so for a horror comic that you're marketing to adults. But one of the big arguments as part of this was that comics were a low literary quality. And that was what they were giving to the youth and saying, hey, they should be reading like actual books, not comic books. It's a lot of the same arguments we have for different panics now, to where not everything is for everyone. Not everything is marketed to everyone. You don't get to pick and choose and go, hey, my kid is watching this show that is inappropriate and the show's not marketed to your children. You have to actually watch your children. You shouldn't be...
Watch your kids.
You get to decide for your child. You don't get to decide for the entire community. So it's like with all the book banning crap that's going on, with the moms who refuse to parent their actual children and want to decide what an entire school can do or what an entire community can do. It's like, no, deal with yourself, do your own job, and don't worry about other people.
The nature of how the Comics Code came into play was, we were talking about the Frederick Wortham famously, and this is the mimetic thing about it. When they say it was violent and all that, Frederick Wortham also thought that comics could incentivize becoming gay, and that Batman and Robin were secretly a gay couple and would turn you gay. And so if you ever want to know where those comic book jokes got started, It was in those Senate hearings. And there's all sorts of stuff going on about Wonder Woman turning people lesbian, and
Okay. I do want to
yeah.
point out he wasn't 100% wrong about the bondage in Wonder Woman because of who the writer was.
Okay, but he
However,
wasn't talking about like the bond. That's the
correct.
thing, is like the bondage was not the subject matter. It was that she had close relationships with other women, and
God forbid women talk to each other.
yeah, well, that's the thing.
Really?
Despite the fact that, like, oh well, if she was with guys, it would be controversial because she'd be, she'd be messing around with the boys. But if she's only with women, then she's encouraging lesbianism. And so, like, yeah, Wonder Woman comics could not win. I do not think, for those of short version, William Moulton Marston, the guy who created Wonder Woman, was really into bondage and made it very clear in some of those comic covers. I did not see any of the bondage stuff come up in the thing. It probably did. It's just I missed it. But yeah, no, it was much more about Wonder Woman making people gay. And the thing that always irks me, the thing that irks me is sometimes if you have people like this, you have grifters who are just like, I am going to find a popular thing. I'm going to tell you how it's going to destroy your family. I need you to get scared. And that's the way they are. That's the kind of person they are. That's their career. Frederick Wortham worked in Harlem as a psychiatrist who discussed how institutional biases can influence child development. And his work was foundational to Brown versus Board of Education's case about how separate but equal doesn't work. And it's crazy to me that you just have this guy who's like, yeah, listen, we need to stomp out this racism in this country. We need to bring in integration. We need to have equality among the peoples. But also, if your kid reads Batman, he's gonna turn gay. And it's just it floors me and annoys it. Like it's why I get grumpy about him so much, is because if it was a guy who just was a grifter, I would not care nearly as much. But if it's a guy who's actually made part of his career to do good things for people, and he thought he was doing good things here, but it's just like, yeah, no, but you're like, it's just fascinating to me. I find Frederick Wortham fascinating, and I kind of want to just put him in a little glass jar and shake it a bit.
He was friends with Freud.
Yes,
So
yeah, I know. It's
you
such a
can't
weird,
you can't trust
weird
his
little man.
ability to
Weird
discern.
little man.
Mm-hmm.
Such a weird little guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't even he says he didn't want governmental oversight, which I just say, my brother in Christ, what are you doing? If you don't want this, then why? Why are you doing this? The other thing is basically kind of how the comics code was laid out. When you lay out those rules, they are very clearly rules meant to be passive aggressive and target people who basically the Senate committee did not like. Was it House or Senate?
Senate. It was a Senate subcommittee. But the Comics Code Authority were actually not a government agency, as Tom was saying at the very beginning. They were put together by the different comics publishers at the time,
Mm-hmm.
because they did not want the government to step in and say, hey, here's how we regulate it. However, they were so strict that it did drive a lot of comics out of business,
Yeah.
comics publishers out of business.
Bill Gaines, who was the person running EC Comics, aka Entertainment Comics, that was a place that had a bunch of stuff. It's where Tales from the Crypt came from. Vault of Horror, which they made a rule because the Vault of Horror logo has the word horror in bigger font than the rest. They said you cannot have the word horror be larger than any other words in the title. That's because they wanted to make sure Vault of Horror couldn't be published and couldn't be sold. They just straight up removed the that thing from being able to, like, that trademarked image, that trademarked logo could not be used. And what basically happened is that Gaines and everybody took their humor stuff and said, hey, all of these rules are only for comics. They aren't for magazines. So they took something they did called Mad Comics and made it a magazine. And that is literally where Mad Magazine comes from, and why Mad Magazine is just full of comics. It's because it was created to spite the comics code.
And how you would be able to show that your comic was in accordance with the Comics Code Authority was they would give you a stamp that you would print on I believe it's the top right of the comic, to show, hey, this went through the approval process. And I believe at this time, we didn't have like comic book stores like we have today. And that was part of the issue because
There
a
were
lot of the
newsstands.
places, the newsstands that would sell the comics would not sell most of them without the Comics Code Authority stamp. So there were a couple different publications that wrote like Disney stories that were in practice exempt from having to go through the Comics Code Authority because Disney has always been ridiculous about like how strict they are with their comics. And so it was basically they already had a G rating. It's fine.
So the specific rules, I know you posted them like to us, but can you go through some of the specific rules that they had to follow?
Sure. So I want to say there was like 41 in the original. The Comics Code was revised twice. Once in 1971 and then once in 1989 before it was completely done away with. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But in the 1954 code, one of the ones that like is so the first one is the main one that they were getting at in the Senate hearings when they were worried about the juvenile delinquency. So, crime shall never be presented in such a way to create sympathy for the criminal, to promote distrust of the forces of law and justice, or to inspire others with a desire to imitate criminals. Some of the ones that are a little more fascist-y, I guess. It's not
Fashy?
really a word. Yeah.
The word is fashy.
Policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in such a way as to create disrespect for established authority. So, yeah, God forbid we poke fun at authority figures in order to keep them in line. And then one fun thing we found before we were going to start the podcast was I did not realize that there was actually a code for the advertising matter in comics. So no liquor, no tobacco advertising, which fine, whatever. No sale of fireworks. And some of the ones that we specifically thought was funny because Tom found something very interesting was you are not allowed to advertise medical, health, or toiletry products of questionable nature. So Tom found something very interesting if he wants to share with the group.
Oh, no, I think this was just, it was, if you've ever read the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comics, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But just, there was a famous thing that in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, they got in trouble for reprinting a real advertisement, which was a comic advertisement for a Marvel branded douche. It's old timey. It's not like a modern thing. It's not like Disney's Marvel, but just it's a very funny image. But there were a lot of things where there was in comics, especially like Charles Atlas bodybuilding routines and like crazy supplements like that. Now, and while they got rid of those, you could still buy a monkey. Like, there were advertisements. I have comics that advertise buying a monkey in the back of them. And let's just say that I can tell you did not have the best animal welfare. So, if you're talking about, like, actually trying to do good things, you know, they
missed the mark.
Yeah, they really did miss the mark. Also, I happen to have one where it's an advertisement where it's endorsed by O.J. Simpson, which is different, interesting for a different reason, but you know, I do like the Meatloaf advertisement though. It's Meatloaf the musician, not the food, and he's advertising the Special Olympics. That's actually a wholesome advertisement. Yeah, I find it fascinating just because of how many weird rules you have in there that are just someone being passive aggressive / someone targeting a creator or persona that like mouthed off during the Senate hearing.
We also get a lot of, so because this is the 50s, people who are very interested in a very specific type of family. So divorce shall not be treated humorously or represented as desirable. So God forbid a woman leave the husband.
God forbid anybody have a divorce.
Uh-huh.
No divorces.
So, no. We just have to have the husband go out for milk and never come back because he's been beating his wife and she has no other way to get rid of him.
Well, that's also the thing where, like, you're like, okay, if you want this character to have a broken home, everyone always makes jokes about superheroes having dead parents. But, well, how do you have someone have tragic backstory without having, you know, them be raised by someone who has a conflict with somebody. Well, since they can't be divorced, we just have to kill the parents. And so Peter Parker's parents get blown up in an airplane disaster that was probably a terrorist attack, depending on the writer. And then his uncle gets shot by a mugger. So, you can't have a backstory where there's divorce, because that might be traumatic or something like that. So instead we have terrorist attack and mugging that Peter believes was his fault. And we have an entire story where Peter, well, just his entire personality is blaming himself for things that he couldn't have known about. That is Spider-Man's entire personality. So great job. We stopped people from being traumatized by divorces. Now they're just traumatized by everything else.
You couldn't present the divorce as being something desirable. So it wasn't that it was traumatizing. It was, you couldn't say, hey, in order to get away from your abusive spouse, this is a good thing.
Well, so going into kind of like the different rules, a lot of what they said like you can't do is kind of foundational to superhero comics, right? So like bad guys, violence, trauma, right? Like I bet there's like some stuff in there about religion.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So how did that, like, because I bet that like really put a lot of pressure on the writers to try and like figure out what they were going to do.
Well, yeah, because you can't have you can't have zombies as villains. You can't have vampires. You can't have ghouls, werewolves. So it really limits the type of villains too.
Mm-hmm. The types of characters had to be heavily restricted. Like, one of the things that I will always remember is there was I think it was House of Secrets. It was an anthology comic, and somebody said, here's a story a wolfman told me. And they got a whole bunch of notes from the Comics Code, but literally you turn the page and it's a story written by a guy named Marv Wolfman.
Mm-hmm.
And, and that was how they got around it, because they're like, technically, that's a real guy's name who is a real writer for this comic, so we're not wrong to say a wolfman told this story. And that was like, again, that was a famous like stab at the Comics Code, because they couldn't have regular werewolves. Spider-Man wanted to have, again, I'm going back to Spider-Man, but they wanted to have monsters that were classical monsters, and they couldn't. But so instead there's a science experiment that happens to Dr. Michael Morbius that makes him what they call the living vampire, because that's like, he's scientifically created using mad science stuff, and he's like a vampire, but he's not. And then you have Man-Wolf, who's not a wolf man. He's just an astronaut who got a weird moon rock that turns him into a giant wolf.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
Well, Man-Bat from Batman.
Yes, Man-Bat. Can't have a vampire, but you can have a scientist who got spliced genetically with bats and now drinks blood.
Now, that specifically, when we're talking about vampires and werewolves, was loosened during the revisions if it was considered literary. So this is going back to the everyone going, comics are low quality. However, in some of the revisions, if we are looking at so Dracula was considered...
Dracula, I was about to say, Dracula is a Marvel character, because part of how they got around it was adapting Dracula.
Mm-hmm. Which the novel is so much better than any of the movie adaptations, in my opinion. But I love that novel. So
I don't know. I really, really like this one vampire movie. And what was it? What was it called?
Twilight.
I was going to set up for something even more cursed than Twilight, but yeah, let's just say Twilight. But yeah, and so straight up, Tomb of Dracula was a Marvel comic that went around the Comics Code because it was deliberately trying to be literary about this sort of thing. And eventually you end up with a lot of stuff that's riffing on those sorts of things. And it's very funny to me that because they wanted to have vampires be a thing in Marvel Comics finally, you had to go through and have all of this extra loot hoops to jump through for Dracula, and then Dracula was your gateway. Because of the Dracula comic they did, that's where Blade came from, the vampire hunter. He came from a Tomb of Dracula story. And so Blade, I would like to say, Blade is probably the most literary of the Marvel heroes. You heard it here first.
So then do you actually think that the Comics Code is all bad? Because it sounds like people had to get pretty creative about their storytelling.
Well,
there are a lot of good things that can come out of someone faced with adversity. I will not disagree that you can create great things in spite of adversity, but I think it's definitely something you create in spite of it.
Mm.
So this is going to go into a weird little tangent, but I promise this is important. There is an artist who is one of the most influential comics artists in the world, probably. His art style, especially in humor comics, in stylized stuff, it's everywhere. It's called. His name is Robert Crumb. I don't like Robert Crumb, like as a person. He is a nasty, nasty man who may or may not have done some really nasty things, but that's all alleged, and I do not want to get sued. Here's the thing about Robert Crumb. He was a influential figure in underground comics. That is to say, comics that were published outside of the Comics Code. They would be in zines, they would be self-published, they would be just like shown around, they would be distributed as books sometimes. It was a whole scene. And there were a lot of great folks in that scene who did independent underground comics. But Crumb, from being controversial and being influential and other people imitated his style, he kind of is one of the big guys to come out of it. And Crumb is, his art is, I mean, okay, if you've seen the famous Keep on Truckin' image, it's kind of a meme, that's from him. His art style, like definitely Garbage Pail Kids, all of that is from his style. But his art was incredibly mean spirited and incredibly cruel, prejudice about basically about anything you could find. There are questions about whether or not he was a predator. There's all sorts of nasty things about this guy's life. And the fact is that he would never have been able to accomplish as much as he did if he didn't have the Comics Code to be a rebel against. The Comics Code made him his comics were resistance to something policing artistic speech. And if he didn't have that rallying cry, he would not have the reach he does. Or he still does. Like, technically, he still does. And I wish he didn't. I wish other people from that scene were more influential, because there are a lot of really great comics creators in underground comics that get overshadowed by Crumb. And I think if we didn't have the Comics Code, Robert Crumb would not have been able to have a career, because his entire thing is the man doesn't want you to read my comics. And in if you want to know the truth, I am the man. I don't want you to read his comics because I don't want him to get money. He's an absolute scumbag individual, and I don't want to bring the mood down by talking about it. But like, you can look it up. You can look up stuff about this guy, or you can just literally read his comics, and you'll just be like, yeah, I get why Tom doesn't like this man. His entire career is because the Comics Code Authority exists. And so I don't think just regulating, you're just having the Comics Code and being like, yeah, but a bunch of people made good art in spite of it. Yeah, but also a bunch of people got into a position in the industry by being opposed to the Comics Code Authority, and they were able to get away with doing a lot of nasty stuff to people.
So one of the things the Comics Code also heavily policed was romance comics. And that actually allowed a lot of romance manga to get published and become popular in the States.
Oh.
Because it was not regulated. It was only US comics that were being regulated from this.
Oh, yeah. Like romance, noir, crime, all this stuff. There are so many different types of genres that you'll find in comics outside of the US. Like, France has its own comic scene, a huge, long tradition. You've got Hergé in Belgium with his Tintin books. But, like, because everything got killed except for superheroes, that's why superheroes aren't so much of an American thing.
Do you think that that's why manga became really popular over here?
Oh, yeah. Manga is covering something that we aren't getting. It was what we were talking about with Punderworld and with Lore Olympus. People want this sort of stuff, and if you can't get it normally, yeah, they're going to go for it.
So I was going to get into how the Comics Code started to loosen, if we're ready to go there.
Yeah.
So Tom briefly alluded to it, I think, when we were recording. But in 1971, the government actually reached out to Marvel Comics, Spider-Man specifically, to say, "Hey, can we do an issue showing how bad narcotics are?" It was Spider-Man. He was helping. Oh gosh, was it Harry? who was having a problem with
Harry Osborn
narcotics.
has had a drug problem in the comics. I don't remember if this was a story specifically with Harry.
Hmm.
But yeah, Spider-Man was helping somebody deal with drugs.
And the Marvel editors explained to the Comics Code Authority, hey, we're partnering with the government to show that narcotics are bad. But the Comics Code Authority still refused to give them the seal. So Marvel went ahead and printed the Spider-Man issue without the Comics Code Authority stamp on it. And it sold.
Ooh.
So that was when that happened, to give them a reason to say, hey, we need to review this. It's been almost 20 years. Let's loosen some of the restrictions. So it wasn't a huge loosening at that point.
But it had to, like, one of the big two had to, like, take a stand against it in order for people to start paying attention, right?
Mm-hmm. And that was also the first kind of crack to where people were seeing, hey, we can print comics without this code and without the stamp of approval from the code, and they're still selling. So 1989, I think it was DC that time. I can't remember what exactly. I think they were basically, DC was threatening the board, going, hey, you need to make this looser or we're just going to do away with it completely. And so that was the second loosening. And if you look at the actual revision, which, so right now we have the Comics Code Legal Defense Fund, Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, I'm sorry. So they
I was about
are
to say, that's very different.
No, sorry. So they are an organization that protects comics currently from censorship. Good organization. We do want to support the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. But on their website, they actually have all of the different revisions of the Comics Code. So you can see how it changes throughout the years. But this is also shortly after the 1989 revision. I know DC started releasing Vertigo, which was their imprint, where basically they didn't even go to the Comics Code Authority. So none of the Vertigo comics were published with the approval. So it was kind of their, like, more adult line, which honestly has a lot of what I read. So it had Hellblazer. It had, oh gosh, I don't have the list in front of me. Hellblazer is what I read.
Well, if you're talking about Vertigo, you got Hellblazer, you got Sandman, you got Swamp Thing.
Oh yeah, that's right, Swamp Thing. I think those were the main. Oh, Fables. So Kate, I gave you the first omnibus, I think, of Fables.
Yes.
So yeah, so they're the more adult comics. They never even attempted to get them by the censors. And again, they all sold. So as this was happening, fewer and fewer publishers would give their work to be approved. And eventually, and one of the things that helped this was how comics were distributed changed. So no longer did the publishers have to go to the newsstands, and the newsstands were the ones who were selling the comics and gatekeeping what they would sell. The comic book stores, as we know them today, started appearing. And so if they have someone who wants to buy it, regardless of whether or not it's been approved by the Comics Book Authority, they're going to put it on the shelf. So it gave the different publishers more power to say, hey, we can sell this to someone who's actually going to buy it without your stamp on it. So I think Marvel completely dropped it in 2001, but it wasn't until 2011, I believe, DC finally said, hey, we're no longer going to do this. It was DC and Archie who finally withdrew.
So do you think that the only people that liked the Comics Code were the mothers of, like, impressionable youth?
I don't think it's just mothers. I think it's any fascist who wants to make sure that they're regulating what people can read and think. So it's people who don't understand that just because you read something doesn't mean you automatically are influenced by it, or agree with it. A lot of times you read things that you don't agree with or you don't understand in order to see how people think. It's people who don't realize that reading is supposed to breed empathy.
Or just education, right? Like you said, just trying to see things from another's point of view, trying to understand, like, what their points are.
It's all the people who refuse to read things where the main character isn't exactly like them, versus, like, growing up where I'm like, I could not find someone like me in a book. So I was learning how other people saw things because I didn't realize, like, I always thought people were making romantic attraction up. I always thought people were being dramatic, and I had to Reading helped me understand there are people who feel things differently.
Yeah. It also, yeah, like you said, it tells you about yourself, right? Like you discover new things. Reading is important.
Well, yeah, it's storytelling is a way of it's so fundamentally storytelling, and it's why people care about stories in general. Not to be like, oh, stories are magic, but like we have empathy parts of our brain, and that makes us we can identify with the story, and that's one of the cool things about it.
Until you get jump scared by a dog dying in a book and I throw it across the room.
That means your empathy is working.
Well, yeah, but I'm also not going to suggest you read JoJo's Bizarre Adventure anytime soon.
No, no, no.
Y'all have warned me.
No. No. I don't want to talk about it.
So
I don't want to even bring it up. That book is dead to me.
And I will say things like that. I appreciate trigger warnings in books, or it like the rating system where it's like MT, but those rating systems I don't necessarily feel like give me anything, because like language I don't care about. There are other things that will trigger me to put down a book and go, this is not for me, this is not something I want in my head. And I think that is something that needs to be explored. And now we have websites like Does the Dog Die? Where I can do my own research and see, hey, I want to read or watch this. Am I going to be okay reading or watching this? Or am I immediately going to want to turn it off? And I like things like that. But things like that are not saying, because I don't want to watch this, I'm going to prevent everyone else from watching it.
Right.
Tom, as a side tangent, the dog was a Great Dane. And I watched the anime in front of my dog and like had to cover his eyes. It was bad. I got through one episode.
Oh, no.
I got through episode 1 when it happens. And I have since been told what happens in the manga. And thank God I only watched the anime.
But yeah, it's kind of there is this fundamental thing. It's every time there's a new media that is more popular with children, or not even children, if it's a popular medium with people who aren't the age of policymakers, it's going to get blamed for a lot of stuff rather than watch your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Do some parenting.
In this day and age, we even have parental controls you can turn on.
Yeah. It's just one of the best summations I can ever think of. When I was in college, I was watching a thing about the Comics Code Authority. It was a whole like symposium with people talking about it. And they showed a public service announcement depicting children reading comics and becoming delinquents. And there's this kid with like a Bowie knife going ham on a tree, just stabbing it. And it's like, yeah, this kid could have learned this from a comic. And the thing is that it's a public service announcement that someone filmed. That kid is a paid actor. So like somebody went up to the kid, gave him a Bowie knife and said, "Hey kid, stab the heck out of this tree. We're going to tell people how comics make you do this." And what it actually is telling me is that public service announcements make kids stab trees. Like a comic didn't do that. A director did. Again, parents, watch your kids.
And if your child is that angry, take him to therapy.
But Jordan, then they would have to admit the kid has a problem. They can't do that. It's the comics.
Yeah, I was going to say, just not to Frederick Wortham's friend Freud.
Oh, God.
Jesus.
No, he was more interested in gaslighting women.
I don't know what you're talking about, Jordan. Sounds kind of crazy.
Fuck you.
So, do we know about the financial impact that the Comics Code had?
Straight up, we had a whole bunch of companies that all collapsed because of this. And there's a reason in America we have the big two comics, which are Marvel and DC, aka Disney and Warner Brothers.
So that was a direct response, or like a direct effect of the Comics Code?
Not exactly. There were other comics companies, but just the Comics Code killed so many companies and all that. Every once in a while, you'd have smaller companies, basically independent companies that come up, but those normally get bought by one of the big two. Don't get me wrong, like there's a whole market crash and the bottom fell out in the 90s, and so these were all absolutely like wiped out. and then like everything had to be restructured because of the comics industry bubble popping. But yeah, like we used to have more companies that did this. We used to have more competition, and now, even now, independent comics in the American, comics field are very tiny compared to just like the juggernauts of Warner Brothers and Disney, who now own Marvel and DC. Marvel used to be so big that like they were trying to become another Disney. They kept buying up other comic book companies because they had so much money. Only now, with as many indie companies as there are, and it's still not many, we're getting independent comics published.
And also, so if you do like an independent comic series, a lot of times they're not just like kept on the shelves of your comic book store. So if you have like a pull list, you can go and request them, and request that like your local comic book store order a specific comic for you. But you might not find it on the shelves like you would all of the DC and Marvel releases weekly.
So do you think that with the rise of webtoons and manga and all of that stuff, like graphic novels, do you think we're going to start to see the big two kind of slip a little bit in power?
The fact is so they're mega corporations, so they aren't going to slip. They aren't going to suddenly lose their money. But the thing is, a best-selling comic today from the big two would have been considered a failure back in like 1991. They still have not started selling the numbers they did back before the bubble popped. Straight up, even the big two, the biggest comic publishers out there. Nowadays, they're more like IP factories for adaptations and such.
And they also have the funds to have a lot of their back catalog digitized and available for an annual subscription. Or even, I think they also do monthly subscriptions, but it's significantly cheaper if you do the annual. So they have the staff in order to do that because they have the funds to do that. A lot of the independent creators, you can find them, I believe it's Comixology.
Well, Comixology is Amazon now, I think.
Yeah.
Comixology used to be a really
Jesus
great
Christ.
system, and it had all sorts of really cool stuff on it, and then Amazon took it over and made it so much less user-friendly. It is now, I think they still call it Comixology, but it's not what used to be. Like, it's not what I actually liked about Comixology, because I have not, like, since the Amazon acquisition, I have not gotten a single comic through Comixology. It's just a nightmare to navigate as the page.
Yeah, for independent comics, I usually just order them directly from the comic book store, or like whenever they release a graphic novel, if I can find it on the like Hoopla has a lot of them, or the ones I really like Monstrous, I of course will buy because also the art.
We live in a capitalist hellscape.
Fascist capitalist
You
hellscape.
could say we live in a society, Batman.
No, it's even worse. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean Disney, like a huge mega corporation, bought Marvel, a huge mega corporation?
Well, Marvel wasn't huge at the time. Marvel had filed for bankruptcy, and that's...
And they were selling off, like, so the reason we have so many different Spider-Mans and Fantastic Four is because they had sold them in order to stay afloat for a little bit. And so one of the reasons that they kept like rebooting those is because I think it was Sony, they had to produce a
if they
Spider-Man
didn't keep making Spider-Man movies, Marvel would get the rights back. It's also why there's Fantastic Four movies every few years. Although now they're now actually back with Marvel.
Yep.
But it used to be like back starting in 1994, there was a Fantastic Four movie, which never saw the light of day, but it was made for the express purpose of keeping the rights.
Stuff like that is scummy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, it's... If you read... There's so many good books discussing the history of the comics industry. I remember the comics, The Untold Story, but there's one that was a very good one about Marvel, and I cannot think of the name of it. Basically, Marvel was being run by a venture capitalist guy named Perelman, and Perelman was basically just buying up other companies, folding them into Marvel, doing all of this stuff. He filed for bankruptcy to basically get people he didn't like fired and restructure the company, and then sold it off to people from Toy Biz. And the people from Toy Biz wanted to make money on licensing stuff So that's where you get a lot of the guys who started licensing stuff to Sony, and that actually is kind of how Marvel stayed out of the just like history books and kept going, was because a toy company bought it. But before that, it was like a venture capital way of buying other properties. It was not a comics. I mean, yeah, it sold comics, but like the guy running it did not care about comics as much as whether or not he was going to buy or sell. Like Malibu, which was a digital comics publisher, or a comics publisher that used digital coloring in artists, and it's the art form, whether it's governmental overreach with the comics code, or it's Perelman just trying to do some like shell game with money. You know, the comics industry is not nearly about comics as much as it probably should be.
Well, that sucks.
I mean, we've talked about how little the artists and writers actually get paid. So.
Oh yeah. So I said Comics: The Untold Story. No, it's literally Marvel Comics: The Untold Story. That's the book I was thinking of.
There you go.
I was mixing it. I was thinking it was two different books, and I'm like, no, that's actually just one book. It's called Marvel Comics: The Untold Story.
So, you mentioned that like it got retooled for like 2 stages, right? Mm-hmm. And then when did it finally end?
Officially, I think they put the date in 2011 when DC and Archie Comics pulled out.
Yeah, at that time there was literally, I think, one person who just read all the comics that they were submitting and approving them. It was one person, and if I can get her name.
You were mentioning earlier they actually kept the names of who was reviewing it secret.
Yeah, no, well, they didn't publish them. They were just people around, but like someone did go track down who was the person who read it. Anytime you have like an industry where there's people who do reviews of stuff, you end up with like a board that is going to be shadowy because they were like, hey, somebody's going to try to like sway us one way or the other. Just like try to find the people from the MPAA who rate movies. And you can find them a lot easier now because there was a documentary a couple decades ago. There was a documentary that was all about trying to figure out what their thought process was, and it involved going and trying to find them. Yes. And it's like that. It's technically it's not a secret per se. It's just they don't want to get publicized.
See, I'd be the person who wants to be on that board just to screw with everyone. To go, I want you to explain to me in detail why you don't want to put a black astronaut on the cover of comic. I want to hear you say it.
Do we want to talk about Judgment Day, one of my favorite comic books? Judgment Day is a sci-fi comic, and it is a sci-fi story famous for its twist ending because it was published pre-code. So it's going to be, I want to say 52, because, well, the thing is it's been published, it has been published multiple times, and as a result, I want to make sure, like, okay, so the original publishing was 1953. And the premise is these robots are trying to apply to join a galactic federation. And to make a long story short, there are 2 groups of robots, and they're actually the same type of robot. It's just one group of robots has a casing put on the other group to make them look different, and then sets it up so those robots do more menial tasks, and says it's because of their designation and how they were constructed, but actually on the inside they're all the same. This is famously an extremely subtle comic. But the astronaut who's coming down to evaluate him basically says, yeah, no, y'all did not pass. And y'all got a lot of stuff issues to figure out before we can let you become part of the intergalactic community. And the robots are like, oh man, that's horrible. Is there any hope for us? And he says a really nice little line. The astronaut's name is Tarleton. The robot says, is there any hope, Tarleton, for us? And Tarleton says, of course there's hope. There's hope for you, my friend. For a while on Earth, it looked like there was no hope. But when mankind on Earth learned to live together, real progress first began. And the universe was suddenly ours. And when we learned to live together, the universe will be yours too. Goodbye, my friend. And Tarleton goes up in his rocket ship. He flies up and takes off his helmet, and you see that he is a black man as an astronaut. And this is 1953. This is segregation. This was prior to the Civil Rights Acts and all of that sort of thing, they put a black astronaut in a comic book, and there were people who responded to it and criticized it because obviously they're racist, but when it was republished, the Comics Code Authority was in effect, and they said, no, you cannot publish this because
he was a black
he was a black astronaut. It was straight up said. So one of the fundamental things about the Comics Code, and it's about the nature of this sort of like censorship and control. They can dress it up and make it sound nice, but when they say obscenity, what do they mean by obscenity? And for a lot of these guys, obscenity was non-white people in leadership positions. They considered that obscene. And so whenever people talk about the Comics Code or something like that, this is what they mean. Like, it was not meant in a vacuum of just someone saying, a curse word. And I think that's worth talking about. And I also think Judgment Day, especially the fact that this was a fight. By the way, for reference, Bill Gaines was the guy in charge of publishing this. And Bill Gaines said to the Comics Code something to the effect of, no, we're not going to change his race, because he was told they told him to change the race of Tarleton to make him Caucasian. And Bill Gaines said, no, we're not going to do that. And then the Comics Code Authority said something to the effect of, can you at least remove some of the sweat on his brow in the last panel? Just trying to exert some sort of control. And I do not know what exactly Bill Gaines said back to them.
He threatened them with a lawsuit.
But the statement he made included expletives, which was very funny because it was things that were a little bit blacked out. I think he just said, if you keep trying this, I'm going to fucking sue you, or something like that. He cursed in an official document he sent and then published it without the Comics Code Authority. And that is how Judgment Day got published. And it is like, I genuinely love it. I love reading EC Comics. I'm a huge EC Comics fan. There is so much weird visuals, storytelling, just odd and creative stuff. The EC Comics volume that has Judgment Day that I own is called Weird Fantasy, and I love it, and because that's what a lot of EC Comics is. It's a bunch of weird fantasy. Also, I think about this so much because Frederick Wortham was a guy who wanted to do civil rights. He wanted to have integration. He wanted to support Black Americans. And he was instrumental in an institution that stonewalled Black characters in comics, that stonewalled Black expression in comics, because this guy fundamentally didn't get it. He did not get that having some sort of enforced censorship, enforced control over a medium will come for anybody, will come for anyone that is vulnerable.
Right, it will come for specifically minorities.
Yes, and that's why I want to shake the guy in a little jar. It's just, I find them, I'm like, this is Judgment Day is why I care about the Comics Code Authority, because just like, this is it, Frederick. This is what you did. Like, I know you didn't mean to. I know you're like, oh, this is bad, but this is what you did. You need to think about that. You like, think about this. And yeah, and that's the thing. Like, if you are trying to go for something like this, if you're trying to control a medium, well, it will come for not just the targets it'll hurt people who you actually care about. So yeah, that's me talking about Judgment Day. It's like 7 pages, and it's one of my favorite comics, especially because like I talk about, I'm talking about it in terms of race and all that, but part of the point of Judgment Day is showing you a dystopian society and a messed up, sad state of affairs. And at the end, there is a message of hope saying, no, it'll take time, but like, we did it, and so I know you can do it. And that's like part of why I love Judgment Day so much. It is a dystopian hope. And sometimes you need to have something like that.
Jordan, do you have anything that any particular story that was impacted by the Comics Code that you want to share?
One thing, when Tom was talking, I was thinking about, so we say that Wally is our generation's Flash, but also Jon Stewart was my Green Lantern growing up, and he's still one of my favorite Green Lanterns, him and Kyle Rayner. And I didn't realize he wasn't created as a comic book hero until 1971. And he, at that time, was one of the first Black superheroes in DC Comics, which that is so late for him to be
Also, he
one of the
didn't have
first.
black in his name for once.
And he didn't have electricity powers.
Yes, for some reason.
But I loved his character design. He made Green Lantern interesting to me for the first time because he was, in the comics I read, he was an architect. And so how he would create his, he wasn't just creating a fist to punch someone with, he was building something. And the art was beautiful, and it was like an architecture design whenever he was creating something with his ring. And it was fascinating. And he was just such a good character, and he's my Green Lantern. And the fact that I don't have comics before the 1970s because DC were cowards is just awful. He's such a better Green Lantern than Hal Jordan. And I'm going to get a lot of hate for that, but that's
I was
fine.
going to say, don't let, what's his name from, of course, he's the biggest DC, one of the biggest DC writers, and I just called him, what's his name?
Jeff Johns?
Yeah, Jeff Johns.
Yeah.
Don't let Jeff Johns hear you say that.
He's more interesting, I should say.
All right. Anybody else have any last thoughts?
Kirsten, we haven't heard a lot from you.
Yeah, Kirsten, what do you think?
I mean, I don't really have like I'm not a big fan of it. Like, I do not like this censorship, Sam. I am.
But we did get more and different manga that got popular in the States because of it.
I think manga would have come over here either way.
Oh, yeah.
Even if it wasn't popular in the United States, it's like hugely popular in like South and Central America. So I think it would have gotten here eventually.
And see, I also think that manga readership seems more diverse than the current comics because they have different things you can read. It's not just superheroes. You have different genres. And also, it's not just superheroes where the girls have to stay home. So I honestly blame the Comics Code for a loss of female readership of comics.
That's a hot take.
The romance comics were they were on a decline because of the Comics Code. There was a lot more of them before. The ones that came after were not nearly as big.
Mm-hmm. And I don't even read romance, but I love horror and I love crime, and getting rid of all of those comics.
You heard it here first. Jordan loves crime.
Okay, but
I'm a true crime
that's not
fan.
A secret. That's not a secret about Jordan. That is how
No.
Like, anyone meets Jordan is like, yeah, that's probably someone who's a crime lover.
We've already discussed how the Hannibal TV show is my comfort show. But because I like Hugh Dancy,
I understand.
Stop being mean to Will.
Tales from the Crypt is my comfort show, so I understand. You are among friends.
Also, as a vegetarian, he couldn't feed me people, so.
There you go.
You're
safe.
That's what you're taking away from this?
So I didn't know that there was actually like romance comics. That is news to me.
Some of them were written, funnily enough, no joke, Jack Kirby, when he was doing like kind of jobbing and filling in for other people, wrote a bunch of romance comics under a pseudonym, and in character, I believe as a woman, would answer fan letters. And there was like a letters column, and he was trying his best to answer, and he's just like, they're like, what was your inspiration for this? And he's like, okay, how would this fictional writer persona answer? Well, when I was a young girl of 12, and it's just, I just cannot get over it. It's just very funny to read because it's not like bad. It's just like, this is a guy who's like probably going over. He says, hey, honey, could you tell me how did you feel when you were 12? And then is answering how his wife would answer. Like,
so if people wanted to learn a little bit more about the Comics Code, where would you point them?
The best thing to give you a good look at it is it's a documentary called Diagram for Delinquency. The problem is, unless you want to pay for it on Amazon, it's not streaming anywhere I can find it, but that is like one of the definitive documentaries on the effects of the Wortham hearings and the code and everything like that.
There's also a book by Amy Kirsty Nyberg. I might have said her name incorrectly, and I apologize if I did. But it's called Seal of Approval, The History of the Comics Code. So there's also that book that you can read. The Comics Book Legal Defense Fund has the actual code as well as the 2 different revisions on their website.
And didn't you say they had the transcripts of the hearings?
I don't think I said they had that on their site. You can find the transcripts.
Their transcripts are part of official record of the Senate, and so you can find it with any of the other Senate headings.
Okay.
There's also I have not read this book, but it's the book that everyone always recommends to me. And so I'm going to repeat this without having read the book. So if this book is terrible, roast me over it. But I was told that one of the best comprehensive looks at it is a book called The 10-Cent Plague. I've just not had a chance to read it yet, and I find it really interesting as a subject. So I do plan on reading it.
All right. Can I wrap us up?
Yep.
All right. Thank you for joining us on Bite Me Fanboy, a comics podcast. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your fellow comic fans. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.